Some people say that Odoo business management software is like fertilizer, the way it promotes growth and all. But other people say Odoo is like a magic beanstalk because it grows with your company and is also magically affordable. And there's some people who would even say Odoo's individual software programs come together to build the perfect suite like building blocks. Well, Odoo is all of these things. Fertilizer, magic beanstalk, building blocks for business. So sign up now at odoo.com. ODOO.com.
With a detailed agent directory you won't find anywhere else, Homes.com is the only place to find the in-depth info home shoppers want. Very in-depth info. Looking for a listing agent's contact info? We've got it. The agent with the most sales in your price range? Easy. Specialized agents with all the up-to-date info on your dream neighborhood? We'll know them. A Pisces who enjoys long walks on the beach? You've got other sites for that. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
Remember that 4 foreign hairs had been found in Dani's pubic region and on her cervix. Those hairs had been subjected to testing in 2008 and never again since. This was partially because the file referenced the hairs being consumed by the testing. A letter from 2008 Sheriff James Cashel to the Montana Department of Justice Division of Forensic Science requested the lab to process the hairs for DNA and read, quote, "I am fully aware that this will consume the questioned hairs," end quote. The 2008 testing on the hairs, which had no roots, was, of course, unable to obtain any DNA, and it did not consume the hairs. The hairs properly mounted on slides had been returned to the sheriff's office and were sitting in a box in the evidence room waiting to be discovered. It was a super long shot. Tom Elfmont's report says, quote, "I checked with the FBI regarding their ability to analyze hair. None of it was positive." They were going to have to call upon the rootless hair expertise of Dr. Ed Green at Estrella Forensics in California. You'll recall that Detective Sergeant Depweg used Estrella to extricate a snip profile from a rootless hair in the Judy Nesbitt case I covered early on. Now, in July of 2023, Detective Elfmont arranged for 2 of the hairs to be sent to Estrella for DNA analysis. It took the lab months to complete the testing of the hairs because they had been preserved on slides in some kind of adhesive that had to be treated with a solvent to loosen it. Extreme caution had to be used, and in the end, neither of the hairs yielded usable DNA. In a last-ditch attempt, Elfmont sent the last 2 hairs to Estrella. While they waited, Elfmont and Depweg decided to send Dani's underwear for testing at a private lab, capable of extracting DNA where the state's crime lab could not. They arranged to have the Montana State Lab ship the underwear to Marshall University in West Virginia for testing. And then Estrella's report on the final 2 hairs came in. One proved not to be useful. But the other one, the one found in Dani's cervix, produced a greater than 90% call rate and a snip profile of the man who shed the hair onto Dani. When Marshall University's forensic testing was concluded, they had obtained more than 2 nanograms of DNA from the remaining semen on the outside of Dani's underwear. The investigators didn't need it because they had the snip profile from the hair, but the semen indicated that the assailant had likely ejaculated onto Dani's underwear while she was wearing them, and they had it in their back pocket in the event of a trial. Let me explain the complications with the genealogy in this case. It wasn't as simple as sending the snip to Parabon and having their talented genealogists upload to the open source databases. Montana is one of 2 states in the nation with legislation requiring judicial oversight of the use of IgG, the other being Maryland. In Montana, the investigators were required to obtain search warrants in order to be able to orchestrate the uploads to consumer DNA databases. Tom Elfmont and Detective Sergeant Depweg wrote up the search warrants, and they were signed by a Montana judge and sealed, so I can't access them. Then the SNP profile was sent to Parabon Nanolabs in approximately April of 2024, and CeCe Moore got to work. There was a relative of the suspect in one of the databases who shared approximately 200 centimorgans with him, likely a second cousin or equivalent relationship. CeCe was able to use matches on both sides of the suspect's family tree to identify all 4 sets of great-grandparents. Building down from there, she zeroed in on a particular family with a lot of children, including 3 sons. But the family was firmly rooted in New Hampshire. Dani, as we know, was killed in Montana. CeCe could not find the connection until she started looking at the social media of the 3 adult sons. And when she got to the youngest, she saw that he had a publicly accessible Facebook page, and she hit pay dirt. He had posted on Facebook about his relocation from New Hampshire to Montana, where he still lived. When had he moved to Bozeman? On July 1st, 1996. Danny was killed in September of that year. On May 1st, 2024, Parabon provided the name of 55-year-old Paul Hutchinson of Dillon, Montana. It was time to grab a DNA sample from Hutchinson. So Tom Elfmont wanted to do what every detective in his position would do, put a surveillance team on his suspect. But Paul Hutchinson lived in Beaverhead County, not Gallatin County. So Detective Elfmont met with the Beaverhead County Sheriff David Wendt, who proposed utilizing the services of U.S. Department of the Interior, Bureau of Land Management, Office of Law Enforcement and Security Ranger Matt Mickelson. That's quite a title. He worked in the Dillon field office, where Paul Hutchinson also worked. On June 13, 2024, Detective Elfmont briefed Mickelson and Wendt on the status of his investigation and the likelihood that the hairs collected at Danny Houchins' crime scene in Gallatin County originated from Bureau of Land Management, Dillon, fisheries biologist Paul Hutchinson. After that, Elfmont and Mickelson watched Hutchinson on a daily basis. The man was a creature of habit. Leave the house in the morning, stop at McDonald's for breakfast and an iced coffee, come to work at the Bureau of Land Management office in Dillon, spend the day in the field, drop his stuff back at the office, go home, repeat. Elfmont also conducted some research on property Hutchinson owned in Dillon, cars registered to him, and his employment history. He checked into the military records relating to Hutchinson's 4 years of service, which he said were bland and inconsequential. So after observing the patterns of behavior of this seemingly pretty vanilla suspect, the investigators wanted to get a DNA sample from Hutchinson without his knowledge to test for consistency with the suspect's sample. They knew that Mickelson could not swipe something off the suspect's desk. Those items would qualify as his property under the Fourth Amendment. They needed abandoned property instead. Elfmont asked Mickelson, a BLM employee in the same office, to try to collect some discarded items that might contain Hutchinson's DNA, such as a water bottle or a cigarette butt. I don't know why I love surreptitious DNA grabs so much. Perhaps because I get a little gleeful frisson from the knowledge that the suspect, complacent that he's gotten away with his crime, is being betrayed by his own garbage, usually litter, and his doom is inevitable. Anyway, on June 17th, Mickelson encountered Hutchinson in the hallway at the Dillon field office of the Bureau of Land Management at 9:22 a.m. This is from Mickelson's report, quote, Hutchinson was carrying a clear plastic cup with a lid and straw. I watched Hutchinson raise the cup to his mouth and drink through the straw. As he was drinking, I heard the slurping noise, commonly heard when someone is finishing a drink with a straw, sucking in part air and part liquid. I watched Hutchinson walk over to the small metal trash can and discard the drink cup into it, end quote. The trash can where Hutchinson dropped his McDonald's cup was next to an empty cubicle. Mickelson stopped Hutchinson and asked if he knew where the guy in the cubicle was. He's already in the field, said Hutchinson, who then walked out of sight. Mickelson noted that the trash can contained just one piece of paper and the cup. Bingo. Mickelson waited for hallway traffic to dissipate, took a picture of the cup, put on a rubber glove, and escorted it like a long-lost treasure back to his office. He dumped out the dregs of diluted iced coffee and put the cup in a brown paper bag. He then drove it to Sheriff Wendt's office, documented chain of custody, and watched as the sheriff entered the cup into evidence. Then, on June 27th, Mickelson had another opportunity he couldn't pass up to get some more DNA. The Dillon BLM office was holding an employee breakfast. Mickelson got in line behind Hutchinson, who selected a delicious breakfast burrito and a small prepared cup of orange juice. As he microwaved his burrito, he drank all the OJ and ditched his cup in the trash can at the entrance to the break room. Mickelson was on it. There were other employees in the break room, but Hutchinson had left with his burrito. Mickelson waited until they were distracted and slipped on a rubber glove and snagged the cup from the trash bin, where it was the only visible cup sitting atop an egg flat and some other trash. He grabbed it and beelined to his office. Again, he photographed the cup, put it in a paper bag, and drove it to Sheriff Wendt. But Mickelson wasn't done. He had also enlisted the assistance of F. Stapleton, a special agent who drove an unmarked police vehicle and wore plain clothes, specifically for the purposes of discreet surveillance. This got quite complicated, but in essence, Stapleton followed Hutchinson as he went to the McDonald's drive-thru and then out to the field for the day. When he returned, Stapleton didn't see him discard anything, so he watched the surveillance camera around the time Hutchinson got back at 4:53 p.m. On the surveillance footage, he watched Hutchinson pull a trash bucket out of the back of his vehicle and place 2 McDonald's cups in the container. Then he walked over to the rear entrance of the Dillon field office and dumped the contents of the container into the trash can. They were still sitting there at 5:33 when Stapleton scooped them up, and the retained video evidence of Hutchinson discarding the items was rock solid. So all in all, the investigators had collected 3 coffee cups and 1 orange juice container that Hutchinson had drank from. These items were packaged and provided to Detective Elfmont. He returned to Bozeman and provided the items to the Gallatin evidence technician Cindy, who overnighted the containers to the lab in Missoula. But Detective Elfmont learned that the state lab was all backed up and they weren't able to expedite the testing on the cups. It was decided to request the state lab to send the cups and coffee containers to Bodie Technology to analyze the STR DNA profiles for comparison with the profile in evidence in Danny's case. But that was where he hit a brick wall. The state crime lab refused to release the cups for testing. This was when the special investigators who had been brought in to solve this case, Elfmont and Depweg, realized what they were up against. Montana's right to privacy laws are the most restrictive in the nation, and restrict testing of abandoned DNA, provide that law enforcement cannot interview a known murder suspect, and have very specific provisions regarding Mirandizing suspects. Because of this, the sheriff was very reluctant to allow the investigators to interview Hutchinson. Detective Elfmont knew that he had to be very, very careful here, and every action taken by law enforcement with regard to the suspect had to be done by the letter of the law as it stands in Montana. The county attorney in Gallatin was unable to help, so he reached out to his friend, a partner in a law firm in Chicago called Loeb & Loeb. Jeremy Margolis was the former director of the Illinois State Police and a former U.S. attorney. He and his partner, Robin Waters, agreed to assist Elfmont pro bono and spent weeks researching laws governing suspect interrogations, searches, and treatment under Montana law. They told Elfmont that he was not allowed under Montana law to interview a murder suspect at home, at work, or any other such place without issuing Miranda warnings, even in a non-custodial situation. But Margolis advised that they could interview the suspect without Miranda warnings as long as the interview took place outdoors. If the interview took place indoors, they were required to Mirandize the suspect unless he was the one who invited them inside. Note that all of these Montana requirements are much stricter than the actual Miranda requirements established by the U.S. Supreme Court, but the investigators had to comply, or they would face a protracted legal battle over the suspect's rights, and he might even go free. So now that they understood all the legal restrictions on the rights of suspects in Montana and were confident that they could conduct a legitimate interview that would hold up in court, they decided they had nothing to lose by interviewing Paul Hutchinson. Special Deputy Elfmont requested that Detective Sergeant Depweg get permission from his chief to come to Montana to be his partner for the suspect interview. Given the restrictions they were operating under, the interviewers needed to be very dexterous, skilled interviewers who would not cross any lines in the sand. And the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office had no detectives with any experience at all in interviewing murder suspects like this. Detective Sergeant Depweg told me that he came to Montana to participate on his own free time. In fact, all of his work consulting on this case was outside his actual job. Anyway, he flew to Montana, and on July 23rd, the 2 men drove to Dillon, accompanied by several detectives from the Sheriff's Department, including the Drug Task Force. The plan was to wait until the end of the day to confront Hutchinson as he was leaving his workplace.
I want my kids to have a healthy relationship with food, which means avoiding junk food as much as possible and giving them things that are good for them. That's why I love giving my kids Orgain. It's convenient, real nutrition that checks all the boxes for me. It provides a good source of complete protein to keep my kids going strong and giving them energy to do all the things they want. It offers over 20 essential vitamins and minerals. Orgain is an excellent source of vitamins B12, D, and zinc to support immune health. It's USDA certified organic and has 25% less sugar than the leading kids' high-protein nutritional shakes. One of the best things that I love about Orgain is that I do not have to force my kids to drink or eat anything from Orgain, because the second they tried their shakes, they loved them. Jace loves the fruity cereal flavor. Jolie loves the vanilla and chocolate. So shop Orgain Kids now, available at Orgain.com and selected retailers.
So you want to start a business? You might think you need a team of people and fancy tech skills, but listen to me when I say you don't. You just need GoDaddy Aero. I'm Walton Goggins, an actor, and I like the sound of starting my own business, Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses. But I couldn't do this on my own. GoDaddy Aero uses AI to create everything you need to grow a business. It'll make you a unique logo. It'll create a custom website. It'll write social posts for you and even set you up with a social media calendar. How cool is that? Well, listen to this. For a limited time, you can get Aero All Access for just $1 a week for 12 weeks. We're talking all the AI power of GoDaddy Aero plus a domain, e-commerce store, payments, professional email, a unified inbox, all for less money than I spend on deep tanning lotion while sunbathing off the Amalfi Coast. You know what that sounds like? A plan. Get started at GoDaddy.com. Terms apply.
With a detailed agent directory you won't find anywhere else, Homes.com is the only place to find the in-depth info home shoppers want. Very in-depth info. Looking for a listing agent's contact info? We've got it. The agent with the most sales in your price range? Easy. Specialized agents with all the up-to-date info on your dream neighborhood? We'll know them. A Pisces who enjoys long walks on the beach? You've got other sites for that. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
After leaving the field where he worked all day, Hutchinson stopped at home and dropped off his 2 dogs, and then pulled into the BLM parking lot at 4:34 p.m. As he was unloading his truck, Detective Sergeant Depweg and Tom Elfmont approached him. Elfmont was wearing a Gallatin County Sheriff's Deputy uniform, and Depweg was secretly carrying an activated body-worn camera so he could record the interaction. Elfmont said, "Hey, Paul, I'm Tom Elfmont with the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office, and we'd like to speak with you a little bit." Hutchinson responded something along the lines of, "Okay, give me a few minutes." Elfmont said, "Okay, we can sit here at the picnic tables outside." He knew that if they did so, and Hutchinson did not feel that he was in custody, no Miranda warnings would be necessary. Unfortunately, it was 98 degrees in Dillon that day, and the tables were not shaded. Hutchinson said to the men, "It's too hot to sit outside." He said, "Give me a minute or two and I'll find a place inside for us to sit and talk." This was perfect. Montana law provided that if the suspect invited the police inside, they were not required to Mirandize him. Hutchinson showed Elfmont and Depweg into a small conference room where they sat down at a table with him sitting at the head. They spoke for an hour and 50 minutes. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the interview, there's something you need to know. Another restriction established on the investigators by Montana law provided that they could not ask the suspect if he was guilty. All those interviews we've heard in which the detectives say things like, "We know you did it, come on, you'll feel better if you get it off your chest," those tactics were all off limits. They were going to have to tread very lightly and see if they could obtain a spontaneous confession. The investigators' strategy going into the interview was really a smart one. They essentially pretended that they were investigating a series of water-related murders, and they were consulting Hutchinson as a BLM expert in the waterways around the area. The idea was to get him comfortable talking to them and then skillfully lure him into confessing. The first 28 pages of the 82-page interview transcript are innocuous chit-chat, talking about fishing and trapping and hunting, how did he end up in Montana, etc. Then they spring it on him. Most of the questions are posed by Detective Sergeant Depweg. I'll let you know when Tom Elfmont jumps in. What we're looking into is we've had some deaths that have popped up, females that have been popping up either in the water or near water. And one of the things is these cases are cold. And what we're trying to do is stimulate them, is to try to figure out, who may be responsible for them. And one of the things that Tom and I are looking to do is, like I said, reach out to guys that know the waterways, maybe know the locals. Okay. Depweg continues, the fly shops or tackle and bait shop people that were around back in those days, so we can go out and do some interviews and maybe answer some of these questions as to what happened to some of these women. As a note here, Detective Sergeant Depweg was very prepared. He planned to ask Hutchinson about 4 murders, even though he was a suspect in only one, Danny's. He placed Danny's in the third spot in the retinue of unsolved slayings he was asking about. He wanted to gauge Hutchinson's reaction to seeing Danny's photo without tipping him off that he was the target of that specific investigation. Continuing with the interview. So this is Angela Brown. She was killed in October of 97. So you would have been in college then, right? Answer, yes. Not with BLM during that time? Answer, nope. She was found in the Yellowstone River just outside of Livingston. Do you know or ever fish in that area or know anybody down there that you can think of back in the day that would be somebody we could talk to regarding her disappearance and murder? Answer, I'd talk to the fishing guides. I mean, they're on the river every day. Depway continues, all right, well, and this is probably going to be the same. This is Heather Wilkins. Same thing. She was killed in 2006. Would you have been with BLM in 2006? Answer, yes, I was here. They talk some more about who they should interview. Hutchinson recommends that they talk to the older guys at the fly shops. And then Depway continues, okay, this is Danielle Houchins. She was killed in September of 96. Answer, okay. Depway, and she was found off the Gallatin River. Did you ever fish up there? Answer, I trapped on the Gallatin but never fished the Gallatin. Okay. And do you ever heard of the Cameron Bridge access? Answer, mm-hmm. Question, have you ever been there before? Answer, probably Jackrabbit Lane. I'm going to pause here to talk about Hutchinson's demeanor. You can hear he's not giving anything up, but his body language told another story. When shown Danny's photo, Hutchinson paled. He slumped back in his chair away from the photo and started sweating profusely and scratching his face. Then he started eating his hand, chewing on the webbing between thumb and forefinger until he drew blood. Detective Sergeant Depway told me that at this point, he knew they could get Hutchinson to confess. Remember, though, the investigators weren't allowed to confront the suspect with direct questions as to his guilt. They would have to try to push him over the edge subtly, with finesse. So back to the question about whether Hutchinson frequented the Cameron Bridge fishing access site. He says he regularly trapped rather than fished there. And that was an admission that he was familiar with and trapped at the place where Danny died. Trappers are people who are very familiar with the woods, animal lairs, stalking, and killing. This was huge. With his DNA on Danny, his frequenting the exact area where she was killed, and his moving to town just a couple of months earlier, it would likely be enough for a good prosecutor to put him away. At this point, Tom Elfmont cleverly started building rapport with the suspect about trapping, what animals he liked to trap, and so on. Depweg stepped back in. Going back to Cameron Bridge access, and obviously Danny was killed in September of 96, and the suspect asks, who? Depweg says, Danielle. The suspect says, this one, and points to her picture. Depweg says, yeah, Houchins, yeah, this one. Do you remember any, hunting equipment stores or, the fly fishing stores or bait and tackle shops around that area at that time that could help us, maybe that would know some of the locals in the area? Answer, I don't. Question, do you remember, since this was when you were in school, do you remember hearing about this murder or anything about that? Answer, I don't. I mean, I might have. Then there's a little bit of filler here where the investigators tell him what a big deal this case was in the area. And then they ask him flat out, do you remember this murder? Answer, question, or hearing her name? Answer, I don't. Question, I would ask you if you knew the same thing about the other ones, but you said you were never around the Livingston. Answer, no, I did. I mean, what was that, 30 years ago? Question, yeah, 28. Answer, yep. Yeah, 28 years ago, man. Answer, shit, man, I don't remember. Question, in 97 or Heather Wilkins? Answer, mm-mm. Question, no. Answer, no. Question, okay. And then obviously nothing, you don't remember Danny. Yeah, like I said, if you could think back, I know and 20 years is a long time, man. I get it, brother. Answer, mm-hmm. They talk some more about the guides in the area, what they do, their knowledge base, and so on. Hutchinson says he doesn't have any names for them of the old-timer guides, just suggested guides in general. Question, okay, the last one we have, and again, I appreciate it, man. The last one we have is Tanya Teskey. I don't know if you remember hearing about this case. Tanya was an 18-year-old and she was killed in August of 97, but she had connections to Belgrade as well. Same kind of area, Belgrade, Bozeman. Answer, oh. The question continues. Belgrade area, and she was actually found down in Idaho Falls. Do you remember anything about that? Answer, I honestly don't. Question, oh, okay. So is that the whole point of coming to Montana in 96 was to go to school and be outdoorsy? Answer, yeah. I mean, I figured my parents told me to do something. If you do something you like, you never work a day in your life. Question, fisheries biologist. When I heard the term or, the title on you guys that we're going to be talking to, and you were the first one we're talking to out of the four, answer, when I heard that term, I was just interested in how you did that and how that came about. Answer, I went into the Fish and Wildlife program and just gravitated toward fish. They show him the pictures of the dead girls again, asking if he recognizes any of them. Question, what about Dani Houchins? Do you recognize that name? Answer, I don't. Question, and do you know her? The answer is, was she in school when I went to school? Question, no, she was over at Belgrade High School. Answer, oh. Question, when you were in school? Answer, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know what circle I would have ran into her. Question, yeah, I mean, she's a 15-year-old girl. That's what I'm saying. Answer, oh, yeah. Question, so do you recall, or does she look familiar to you at all? Answer, no, honestly, I don't recognize any of them. Question, we have limited information, and a lot of people were interviewed back in those days, but we're looking for, fresh information. That's what I'm saying. If you recognize either one of these and you're telling you don't know either one of them, answer, I don't know either one of them. Question, okay. Detective Sergeant Debboy continues to press. Question, so do you remember, I know she looks familiar. Dani doesn't look familiar to you at all? You don't know her? Answer, I know. What's the last name? Debboy says Houchins. Answer, Houchins? Does she have an older brother? Debboy says no. He continues, we got Belgrade and Bozeman. We got the Cameron Fishing Bridge. Anybody you can think of we should talk to in that area back then? You know what I mean? Because, you were there. We weren't. That's why I keep bringing it up. We're really trying to figure it out. Obviously, these are all daughters, and their fathers and mothers, have no answers. Answer, right. Question, and we're trying, this is a 15-year-old girl. This is an 18-year-old girl. I don't know if you have kids or not. Answer, I do. I have two. I have a daughter. Question, so you know where I'm coming from. Answer, sure. Question, we're trying to figure out, obviously, some answers as to what happened to these four girls. We don't know that they're connected. We don't know, and that's what we're trying to figure out, and that's why we're asking for help. But we weren't around in 96, and unfortunately, we got to go to guys that were to figure it out. Debboy continues, how old is your daughter? Answer, 18. Question, yeah, so right in this ballpark, and it's devastating for a parent to have to go through that and not have answers. Answer, They talk about whether he has been to the Cameron Bridge area, and he repeats, yes, he has, but he couldn't tell them when. He says he might have just floated down there in tubes or something, but then he admits that he knows where the parking lot is. You take Jackrabbit. They ask if he's ever been in the parking lot, and he says probably, I don't know. Question. Like I said, we're trying to piece it together. If we end up having, if you think of anything, you got Tom's card, just text me if you think of something. Yeah, we're trying to, like I said, we're trying to answer some questions for the parents, You got to imagine. If you have a daughter that's 18 years old, so you got to imagine how terrible this is. This is going to be, for that family to wait 28 years. And we're just trying to obviously identify some answers. Obviously, she's the youngest. We're pretty focused on trying to get some information. The names I read to you, do you think any of them would be able to help us better, the other BLM guys? Answer, I don't know. Question, okay, well, we're going to talk some, obviously we'll reach out to these other guys and talk to them if they can give us some information. Like I said, the guide thing was great, so we didn't even think about that. So the reason we're hyper-focused on Dani is obviously because of her age. That's why, and with you knowing the Cameron Bridge access area, that's where she was found. She was found off the side of a pathway that was leading out to the water. So that's why we're hoping maybe you have some information for us. So do we have, in this case, and to let you know, obviously you work for BLM, so I don't have a problem telling you this, but there's advancements in technologies. It's crazy. I don't know if you follow the news or anything like that, but DNA has, come a long ways. Answer, yeah, we use it all the time. Question, do you? How do you guys use it? Answer, fin clips. Hutchinson explains that they take a fin sample and run it, and they can determine the purity of the fish. Question. Oh, gotcha. Yeah, DNA has come a long way. And obviously it's come a long way in Danny's case. And we have what we believe is the suspect's DNA. Answer. Okay. Question. So we do have what they call a profile. Do you ever watch any kind of crime forensic stuff? Or answer. No. Or question continues. TV, shows or anything like that? I mean, obviously your background with DNA and the fish pretty similar, basically. I mean, we do the same thing. We have DNA from her body that's foreign to her. Answer. Right. Question. We look into it and try to figure out who that person is. Answer. Mm-hmm. Question. And the nice thing about, the one positive case in this is that we have one male profile. Answer. Okay. Question. So, and it's just one person. So it's not like we're trying to figure out, multiple people. Now, do we know who that person is? That's what we're trying to figure out. And that's why we're talking to you today. If you have any information as to maybe who that person would be. Answer. I don't. Elfmont chimes in here. The whole thing, if you look at the history of the state of Montana, especially modern history, Montana has the drug deal killings. They have family killings where husband kills wife, wife kills husband. Two guys get in a bar fight, somebody gets killed and everything. But what's unusual here is you don't have stranger murders. Hutchinson asks what stranger murders are. Elfmont responds, in Danny's case, it's definitely an unknown murder. And with the recent improvements in DNA technology, I think we're getting to the point where at some point we're going to be able to, I think, don't you agree, court, identify somebody? Depweg says, yeah. And Elfmont says, yeah. And Depweg says, 100%. Yeah, I think we're going to be able to identify somebody. Then they ask Hutchinson if around the end of September 1996, does he remember anybody talking about it? Maybe having sex with a girl out at Cameron Bridge. He says no, he would have been in the mountains elk hunting at that time. Question. In 96, when you got here, where'd you move to? Answer. 96. I was living in a woman's basement, up on the Hiatus Road. Hutchinson can't remember this woman's name. He says he doesn't remember anybody talking about this murder or having any conversations with anybody about it. They asked him if he had a girlfriend at the time, and he said he was dating a girl from Virginia. They were living together in Bozeman. Her name was Melissa H. She was a reporter for the local Belgrade paper. They asked him if she reported about the story, and he said, I'm sure she did. Question. Yeah, okay, well, that's good. Yeah, like I said, so we do have DNA. We're moving forward on that. But again, we still have to obviously do some due diligence and talk to people. Answer. Mm-hmm. Question. A lot of interviews were done back then, but, interviews with kids, when you're 14, 15. But we don't think this was a kid. We think this was an adult. Answer. Okay. Question. And the reason we say that is based on the trauma she sustained. Everything that we look into on our crime scene, this tells us it's an adult. We don't think it was, a high school or classmate. Answer. Okay. Question continues. We just don't. We don't perceive that to be what happened. To be honest with you, it looks like it probably got out of hand. It looks more like panic to me. It looks like, hey, obviously there was some sort of sexual, some sort of sexual act that was being done. And then it sounds like somebody got scared and panicked. And that's what I think whoever did this to her, I think that's what it boiled down to, is somebody panicking. Answer. Okay. Question. What we know is, obviously that Cameron Bridge Access Road, you said you're familiar. There's a parking lot there. You said you might have been down on that parking lot area. And there's a lot of people that were down there. I'm guessing probably there was some screaming going on. I'm guessing she was screaming. Answer. Okay. Question continues. I'm guessing the person got panicked and ultimately killed her to make her stop screaming and obviously be caught. That's what I think happened. And I think that person I don't think that person, I don't know. We're not going to know till we figure it out. But I don't think that person killed before that. I think this was something where it happened the first time. And has the person killed since then? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. You know what I mean? Elfmont steps in here. Well, the other thing you have to remember in 1996 in Montana, if you have a sexual assault that ended up in a death, that's a death penalty case. Depweg says, right. Elfmont says, yeah, that's 28 years ago. It was a death penalty case here. Depweg agrees. Elfmont says, so the perpetrator's going to have that in the back of their mind, too. Depweg says, yeah, and like I said, we're trying to get some answers for the parents. And thank you for Melissa H's name. The idea of going and obviously doing the check-in with the guides, but Again, I know I'm harping on it, man, but I need you to think back. Is there any reason, or do you think there's any possibility that you could have been in the area when this happened? Do you remember a girl screaming or anything like that? Answer, I don't. Question, that's why I'm saying, have you ever encountered that before? Answer, no. Question, is there a possibility that you were there when she was murdered? Answer, no. Question, you don't remember any screaming or anything like that? Answer, no. They tell Hutchinson they're going to talk to this woman, Melissa H., that he was living with at the time, and he says they broke up before he met his current wife on Match.com. They've been together now for 24 years. Elfmont says, so if you think of something, you can always text us. Answer, I got friends in Bozeman. I'll call them and see if... Question, they remember anything? Answer, yes. Question, that would be a huge help, man. Answer, I may have heard about all those cases. Question, Answer, honestly, but... Question, well, the two that were out in Yellowstone is one thing, because you said, hey, I wasn't on the Yellowstone, but obviously Belgrade. Answer, Belgrade was close. Question, yeah, with these two. And then Danny, obviously, the Cameron Bridge access, you obviously knew you're familiar with that area. So that's why I'm asking you specifically about Danny. Answer, yeah. Question, the reason I was talking about Danny earlier was because it's a stranger murder. Answer, yeah. They start talking about how Danny's murder rocked the community. People were devastated and shocked because Danny was very well liked. They ask Hutchinson if he can understand how they would feel having a daughter himself, and he makes all the right noises about how he would be devastated. Question. And that's what we're trying to answer for Danny's dad right now and her mom. Who did that and why they did that, just to answer those questions. Why? Was it a mistake? Was it, was this a one-off? Why did this happen to her? Being, 15 years old, man, Could you imagine 15 years old and some, like I said, I think it's an adult. I think an adult did it. For them to come in and absolutely just, you're sitting there as a dad thinking my daughter's, probably screaming in his name, asking for dad's help. All she probably wanted to do was go home to dad. Answer, right. Question continues, screaming for her dad to save her. He couldn't be there, and that as a dad, of daughters, and you and me are in the same position. That just rips my heart out. So we need somebody, obviously. We need somebody to come forward and give us some information so we can find out who that person is. And that person can call us. And if you have any information as to, who that might be, we'll sit down with anybody and talk to them. And it'll be a conversation like this. We'll sit down with anybody that has information that'll come forward. Tom and I are pretty laid back guys, so it'll be just like this. Notice here, Sergeant Debweg is trying to get Hutchinson comfortable with the idea of confessing. Debweg continues, and I know, we went over 4 cases, but specifically with Danny, is there anything you think is important that I should know that I didn't ask you about? Answer, no, I don't know too much about these cases. Question, okay, well, thank you very much for your time, sir. And Tom says, yeah, thank you very much. Answer, yeah, Question, okay, really nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, sir. Answer, anything else? We appreciate it. Anything else you want to ask me while I'm here? He says. They say no. He says, question, no, we're good now. Yeah, no, that's it. Answer, all right. Question 1, like I said, I appreciate your time. I know we were getting off work and you're busy doing stuff with everybody. I really appreciate your time, sir. Answer, yeah, it's no problem. They end the interview by getting Hutchinson's cell phone number and giving him their business cards and telling him they're going to get in touch with the other Bureau of Land Management guys. Hutchinson is sort of apologetic that he didn't have any more information for them. No worries, if you remember anything, call, they say. Sometimes when they talk to people, they'll tell them something they think is insignificant, but actually it'll be important. The interview ends as follows. Hutchinson says, thanks. Sorry for coming all the way down here. Debweg says, hey, it's part of the job, bud. Hutchinson says, yeah, feel free to call me too, man. Debweg says, all right, bud. Alfmont says, thank you. Answer, yep. Can we just go out the front or how do we get? Answer, yeah. And they say, we'll figure it out. And he says, Matt's going to escort you out. And they say, oh, okay, that'll be okay, no problem. So this is Debweg now. So it's 5:55 p.m., June 23rd. This concludes the interview with Paul Hutchinson in the conference room at the BLM building in Dillon. Thank you.
I want my kids to have a healthy relationship with food, which means avoiding junk food as much as possible and giving them things that are good for them. That's why I love giving my kids Orgain. It's convenient, real nutrition that checks all the boxes for me. It provides a good source of complete protein to keep my kids going strong and giving them energy to do all the things they want. It offers over 20 essential vitamins and minerals. Orgain is an excellent source of vitamins B12, D, and zinc to support immune health. It's USDA certified organic and has 25% less sugar than the leading kids' high-protein nutritional shakes. One of the best things that I love about Orgain is that I do not have to force my kids to drink or eat anything from Orgain because the second they tried their shakes, they loved them. Jace loves the fruity cereal flavor. Jolie loves the vanilla and chocolate. So shop Orgain Kids now, available at Orgain.com and selected retailers.
So you want to start a business? You might think you need a team of people and fancy tech skills, but listen to me when I say you don't. You just need GoDaddy Aero. I'm Walton Goggins, an actor, and I like the sound of starting my own business, Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses. But I couldn't do this on my own. GoDaddy Aero uses AI to create everything you need to grow a business. It'll make you a unique logo. It'll create a custom website. It'll write social posts for you and even set you up with a social media calendar. How cool is that? Well, listen to this. For a limited time, you can get Aero All Access for just $1 a week for 12 weeks. We're talking all the AI power of GoDaddy Aero plus a domain, e-commerce store, payments, professional email, a unified inbox, all for less money than I spend on deep tanning lotion while sunbathing off the Amalfi Coast. You know what that sounds like? A plan. Get started at GoDaddy.com. Terms apply.
With a detailed agent directory you won't find anywhere else, Homes.com is the only place to find the in-depth info home shoppers want. Very in-depth info. Looking for a listing agent's contact info? We've got it. The agent with the most sales in your price range? Easy. Specialized agents with all the up-to-date info on your dream neighborhood? We'll know them. A Pisces who enjoys long walks on the beach? You've got other sites for that. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
So, as you heard, Paul Hutchinson was somewhat incredulous that they were allowing him to leave. In fact, after the recording was stopped, he said, "You're letting me go?" As Sergeant AbJack said, it seemed crazy not to push him since he was clearly teetering on the edge of giving it up. As a side note, if Hutchinson had come out and confessed, things would have been complicated. It's not like other jurisdictions where a confession results in an arrest and that's that. In this case, Montana laws would have required the investigators to stop the interview mid-confession and Mirandize the suspect. Further, Gallatin County would have had to provide an extradition order to extradite Hutchinson from Beaverhead County next door in order to try him. None of that happened. Instead, Hutchinson walked away without confessing, but his actions betrayed the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. In fact, he had to take a break 3 times during the interview, stepping out of the interview room to collect himself in the bathroom or elsewhere. He always came back. When he left the BLM office at the conclusion of the interview, a very agitated Hutchinson got in his silver truck and started driving like a bat out of hell. He was speeding, swerving, making U-turns, and generally driving like a maniac, or a cornered animal. I asked where he was going, and the answer was he was just driving around. The investigators' plan was to use the interview video and transcript, plus the STR DNA comparison results from the crime lab, to obtain an arrest warrant, but that was not the way it worked out. Special Deputy Elfmont enlisted Detective Sandy Schroeder to assist. On July 23rd, she and Detective Ryan Duma drove to Dillon to start surveilling Hutchinson. They were waiting to tail him when he left after his interview, probably shaking and sweating. He left the BLM office at 5:56 p.m., got into his truck, and peeled out in the direction of his home. Schroeder and Duma tailed him at a distance. He drove like a maniac, 100 miles an hour in some spots and then sitting, as if dazed, through green traffic lights. Then he pulled a U-turn and parked on the side of the road. As Schroeder drove by, she could see him looking in his driver's side mirror. Detective Duma wrote in his report that Hutchinson appeared to be very agitated. They drove past, knowing he would be tailed by other units. The investigators told the surveillance teams to back off, as they would be too obvious trying to keep up with Hutchinson, and instead they were to watch him from pre-designated field post locations throughout the very small town of Dillon. They were to be on the alert for Hutchinson to cause a violent confrontation, take hostages, or engineer a suicide by cop situation. The units noted Hutchinson went home and then left again within minutes, driving back toward the BLM office at 6:12 p.m. We don't have any idea what brought Hutchinson back to the BLM offices. The interrogators, Elfmont and Depwig, were still there and were given a heads up by the surveillance details that the suspect was headed their way. The two men presumed there could only be two reasons Hutchinson would come back to the interview venue: to confess or to take them all out with the gun he'd picked up at his home. They had a security team with them and prepared themselves for a confrontation, perhaps a suicide by cop situation. Detective Sergeant Depwig made sure that the suspect saw him when he arrived. He was hopeful that Hutchinson would approach him and say, "I want to unburden myself." That's not what happened. Hutchinson, who was empty-handed, no gun, saw Depwig. He turned and headed to the back office. He went into the bathroom and was heard violently throwing up. Then he abruptly left the office just 6 minutes after arriving, having said nothing to anyone. Duma and Schroeder tailed him again. He traveled south on Montana Street to Highway 91, then north on Highway 91 for 6 or 7 miles. He then made a U-turn and drove past the officers the other way. This is from Detective Duma's report. Quote, "We observed a male in a 2-door green Jeep Wrangler with no top, traveling slowly southbound on the shoulder of the roadway. In the distance ahead of us, I saw Hutchinson make another U-turn. Hutchinson was now traveling southbound on Highway 91. After Hutchinson passed us going the opposite direction, I continued north until he was no longer visible before pulling into a private driveway on the west side of the roadway just south of Saddle Drive. Within a minute or two, the Jeep Wrangler and Hutchinson drove north past us and turned left onto Saddle Drive. I could not see the residence they went to." End quote. Duma then wrote, quote, "Due to the fact that Hutchinson was engaging in a pattern of erratic driving that, based on my training and experience, was being used to determine whether he was being followed by law enforcement, we decided to back off." Duma and Schroeder did not know who the man in the green Jeep was. It turned out later that Hutchinson had picked up a check from someone and dropped it off with his wife. The Duma and Schroeder surveillance team did not see him again. I was told that Hutchinson drove around for hours, speeding, parking, weaving, and generally acting like a man on the brink. There was concern among the investigators that he might go home and shoot his entire family living in the house, which consisted of his wife and teenage daughter. They assigned a tactical unit to watch the house. Detective Nick Redburn was assigned to the surveillance team for the next day, July 24th. He left Bozeman to head to Dillon at 4:30 a.m., but en route, he got a call. At 4:17 a.m. on July 24th, Beaverhead County Dispatch received a call from Hutchinson who stated that an officer needed assistance outside of town, 7 miles west of Dillon, near a solar farm on 10 Mile Road. Dispatch asked the caller if he was injured, to which he stated no. Hutchinson stated his phone battery was about to die, and then the line disconnected. Deputies arrived and found Hutchinson's F-150 on the side of the dirt road, parked against traffic. Hutchinson was lying in a ditch next to the truck, face up, with a gunshot wound to his left temple. The gun, a Derringer .380, was in his hand. No one was surprised. Detective Redburn arrived and photographed the body and scene, and they searched Hutchinson's truck and phone and didn't find anything related to the case. So who was Paul Hutchinson? Paul Nathaniel Hutchinson was born to parents Paul and Sheila Hutchinson on June 13, 1969. He was 55 years old when he took his own life. He'd been married for 22 years and had 2 children with his wife. Hutchinson was raised in Wilton, New Hampshire, graduating from high school there in 1987. He worked in his family's construction business, Paul Hutchinson and Sons, and then spent 4 years in the Marines, receiving an honorable discharge as a corporal. He enrolled in Keene State College and then in September 1996 transferred to Montana State University, from which he got his degree in fisheries wildlife biology. After interning in Glacier National Park and Sisters, Oregon, he returned to Montana and went to work for the Bureau of Land Management in Dillon. He stayed at that job until his death. Hutchinson was an avid bow hunter, fisherman, trapper, and so on. He participated in local community events like the annual Kids Fish Day and the Kids Fishing Derby in Beaverhead. He had no criminal history. The CBS News show 48 Hours did a segment early this year on Danny's case and interviewed a woman who knew Hutchinson. This is an excerpt from the episode. Quote, "Stephanie's childhood friend, Rochelle Schrute, knew Hutchinson. He was a trusted mentor who she had first met in the early 2000s. Here's Rochelle. Paul came across as just an under-the-radar person that was always so kind of calm and quiet. He was just so utterly unremarkable. Paul was super active in the hunting community. He was just like this respected source of information in the hunting and fishing space. Rochelle knew Houchinson for years. She is an expert hunter and former Yellowstone Park guide and is now hunting and fishing editor for GearJunkie.com. Here's Rochelle. I think I would have considered him a friend. If we were doing some sort of hunt camp, I would not have even thought twice about inviting him. Rochelle says she never once questioned Houchinson's integrity, and she even went on fishing trips with him, just the two of them, out in the middle of nowhere. Here's Rochelle one last time. I've always trusted my gut instinct when it comes to, especially men. I've never had any feeling that he was unsafe, end quote. How terrifying to find out this man you were alone with in the middle of nowhere was a murderer.
I want my kids to have a healthy relationship with food, which means avoiding junk food as much as possible and giving them things that are good for them. That's why I love giving my kids Orgain. It's convenient, real nutrition that checks all the boxes for me. It provides a good source of complete protein to keep my kids going strong and giving them energy to do all the things they want. It offers over 20 essential vitamins and minerals. Orgain is an excellent source of vitamins B12, D, and zinc to support immune health. It's USDA certified organic and has 25% less sugar than the leading kids' high-protein nutritional shakes. One of the best things that I love about Orgain is that I do not have to force my kids to drink or eat anything from Orgain, because the second they tried their shakes, they loved them. Jace loves the fruity cereal flavor. Jolie loves the vanilla and chocolate. So shop Orgain Kids now, available at Orgain.com and selected retailers.
So you want to start a business? You might think you need a team of people and fancy tech skills, but listen to me when I say you don't. You just need GoDaddy Aero. I'm Walton Goggins, an actor, and I like the sound of starting my own business, Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses. But I couldn't do this on my own. GoDaddy Aero uses AI to create everything you need to grow a business. It'll make you a unique logo. It'll create a custom website. It'll write social posts for you and even set you up with a social media calendar. How cool is that? Well, listen to this. For a limited time, you can get Aero All Access for just $1 a week for 12 weeks. We're talking all the AI power of GoDaddy Aero plus a domain, e-commerce store, payments, professional email, a unified inbox, all for less money than I spend on deep tanning lotion while sunbathing off the Amalfi Coast. You know what that sounds like? A plan. Get started at GoDaddy.com. Terms apply.
With a detailed agent directory you won't find anywhere else, Homes.com is the only place to find the in-depth info home shoppers want. Very in-depth info. Looking for a listing agent's contact info? We've got it. The agent with the most sales in your price range? Easy. Specialized agents with all the up-to-date info on your dream neighborhood? We'll know them. A Pisces who enjoys long walks on the beach? You've got other sites for that. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
Hutchinson's suicide confirmed the suspicions of the detectives. This from the Montana Free Press. Quote, Montana has very strict individual rights laws, and at the moment that we interviewed him, we did not have confirmation that that was his DNA, Springer said in an interview. He confirmed it before we actually got the confirmation when he took his own life, end quote. But they wanted more. Hutchinson's body was removed by the coroner, and Detective Elfman directed Sergeant Mike Edmonds that swabs be taken of Hutchinson's inside cheeks. Edmonds drove those swabs back to Bozeman and booked them into evidence and overnighted them to the Montana Forensic Lab in Missoula. Travis Spinder, the lab director, expedited the testing on the swabs and, quote, 3 days later, we got confirmation from the Montana State Lab that it was a positive match on the DNA profile taken from the semen on Danny's panties and the swab of Hutchinson's inner cheek. The chance of being another person was 10.7 trillion to 1. As Sheriff Springer described it, these test results were 100% confirmation that Hutchinson was Danny's killer. Detective Elfman and Gallatin County's Chief Deputy Eric Paulson met with Hutchinson's wife in the Dillon courthouse meeting room to interview her about her husband. The interview must have been very intimidating for her, as also present were the undersheriff of Beaverhead County, the coroner, the county attorney, and Sheriff Dave Wendt. Mrs. Hutchinson brought her 18-year-old daughter along, which must have been incredibly awkward when the line of questioning turned to her and her husband's sex life. First, the investigators explained to the Hutchinsons what had happened in the case and answered some of their questions. This next bit is from Tom Elfmont's report. Quote, "Then I began to speak with the wife and asked her if Paul practiced unusual sexual behavior. She stated that he chronically watched pornography and she thought he was addicted to it." End quote. Mrs. Hutchinson also said that her husband at times was sexually dysfunctional and was unable to climax during sex. Quote, "She said she had no clue that he had committed this crime or any other crimes. I then interviewed the daughter, who is 18 years old, and asked if her father had ever made inappropriate comments or ever touched her inappropriately. She said no. I asked over the years when her girlfriends came to the house, did he ever speak inappropriately to them or inappropriately touch any of them? She said no." End quote. One wonders whether the daughter would have had different answers were her mother not present. Sheriff Springer voiced feelings in an interview with the Montana Free Press that we can all empathize with. He said, quote, "I feel sorry for the Hutchinson family. They were unaware, of course, and in many ways, they are also victims of this man." End quote. So how did Danny's sister Stephanie react to the news that Paul Hutchinson was confirmed as her sister's killer? Tom Elfmont called her at 5 a.m. and told her the news that Paul Hutchinson had killed himself. Stephanie later told the Montana Free Press, quote, "I guess I was relieved that it wasn't someone who was close to my family. It wasn't someone where we not only have to deal with everything that goes along with solving your sister's homicide case, but also that feeling of betrayal if it was Danny's friend or family friend or community member." Stephanie said her feelings at hearing the news were going to take some time to sort out. She also told a TV interviewer that she didn't condone suicide, but she was glad her sister's killer was dead. She felt it was justice for her sister and resolution for her family. I think everyone was relieved that there would not be a trial. As we all know, Danny's case was botched almost beyond repair. The defense would have had some very strong arguments given the state of the evidence, lack of witnesses, and, oh yeah, the failure of the medical examiner and coroner to even label the case as a homicide. Capital trials in Montana are televised, meaning that the family would have had to endure a very public airing of everything that happened to their beloved Danny. It would have been ugly, and justice was far from guaranteed. With Hutchinson's suicide, it was. Gallatin County Sheriff Dan Springer held a press conference announcing the resolution of the Danny Houchins case. In attendance were Danny's brother, sister, parents, all of their spouses, a cousin, and many others. The sheriff told the assembled crowd of his own personal connection to Danny's case. He explained that he was hired as a young deputy by the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office on September 16, 1996. 5 days later, Danny was reported missing and found murdered. As Sheriff Springer said, quote, "She had been raped, suffocated, and left face down in shallow water. This case has haunted her family, me, the sheriff's office, and this community for all those years," end quote. He talked about how, as the years passed and all the suspects were eliminated through interviews and alibis, the case grew cold. Springer told the assembled crowd how they had identified Hutchinson through IgG. By all indications, he said, Paul Hutchinson was a stranger to Danny, one of those stranger-on-stranger murders that are incredibly hard to investigate and which highlight the importance of proper collection and preservation of evidence. Springer noted that Hutchinson, a newcomer to the area, lived in Bozeman, less than 13 miles away from the Cameron Bridge fishing access site where Danny was killed. He likely encountered her on the trail in a crime of opportunity by an evil man, as he put it. Springer did not shy away from public criticism of his agency for botching the original investigation, although he acknowledged that the critiques were hurtful. He said, quote, "That is not how I run my department. As long as I am the sheriff, I will do everything in power and power of those who work for me to bring justice to victims, to bring peace to chaos, and hunt down those who bring harm to others," end quote. Springer said he always knew this day would come. The investigation remained open because we knew Danny was murdered and someday we were going to have the tools available to solve this case, he said. This case exemplifies our relentless pursuit of justice. We never gave up on finding the truth for Danny and her family, exhausting all means necessary to bring closure to this heartbreaking chapter, end quote. The sheriff stated emphatically that Danny's case is closed, but he told the media that Paul Hutchinson was known to travel throughout the country on hunting trips, and the implication was there might be more crimes out there. The investigation into Paul Hutchinson has revealed that he had fishing and hunting licenses in 33 different locations throughout the United States. So, small remote agencies, start checking your unsolved murder inventory. Bolos had been sent out on a national level about Caucasian 6'4" child predator Paul Hutchinson, who apparently had an oddly shaped head that would possibly make him memorable to witnesses. Stephanie spoke after the sheriff, thanking him for delivering justice for Danny. Then she thanked Tom Elfmont. She thanked Cindy Botek for investigating when no one in the department supported her. She thanked Matt Boxmeyer for reopening Danny's case, and she thanked Keith Farquhar for caring for Danny for all those years and supporting the family. Finally, she thanked the community for never forgetting her sister. Quote, "Even though this man will not face a jury of his peers, I have no doubt he was the one who forcefully and violently sexually assaulted my sister and then held her head down in a marsh until she choked to death on mud," she said. When the time came to face up and account for his violence, he instead chose to end his life. He knew of his guilt and couldn't face my family or his family and the pain he had caused. We have honored Danny's memory with justice. But Stephanie was not going to let the people who so miserably let down her family get off easy. She told the assembled crowd of reporters and community members, "The institutions of justice in Montana failed us." The 1996 Sheriff's Office made the determination that Danny's manner of death was undetermined, but, quote, "Danny's body had been dragged over 20 feet by her left arm, and her watch was pulled over her hand. Her face was scratched and bruised. She had subcutaneous bruising on the back of her neck, indicating that her head had been held forcefully in the mud. Her bra was rolled up under her shirt. Semen and male hairs were found in her underwear and in her genitals. And yet, even though the detective team put all this evidence in front of their leadership, the sheriff, coroner, and medical examiner did not rule Danielle's death as a homicide," Stephanie said. But this was not just incompetence, Stephanie maintained. The family was lied to, told that no marks or injuries were found on Danny's body. She said, quote, "The sheriff lied to my parents, bold-faced lied, and betrayed the trust of shocked and grieving parents." The institutions that are designed to protect the rights of victims, to ensure that vicious killers are incarcerated to deliver justice in Montana, those institutions failed my sister, failed my family, and failed this community, Stephanie declared. She went on, quote, "The Montana State Crime Lab failed my sister countless times. They misfiled the evidence in Danny's case that ended up being the breakthrough that solved it. This meant they sat on this evidence for 27 years. Other evidence collected at the scene was long since lost, like the watch on her hand. When the investigations team finally had a DNA profile, they wanted to check the suspect DNA against other cold cases. But the state of Montana does not have a centralized database of unsolved homicides and assaults. The sheriff's offices in each county are isolated from each other." Stephanie said impactfully, "Montanans, Danny's story should anger you. It should make you think about your mothers, your sisters, your wives, and your daughters. It should make you think about everything you would do to protect and honor the women you love." Stephanie ended with, quote, "I was a child in 1996. It should not have taken my diligence and resolve to solve this case. We are not doing enough to protect women in this state from violent sexual crimes. Be angry and turn your anger into action. We must demand better for victims of murder and sexual assault in Montana." The last to speak was retired LAPD Captain Tom Elfmont, who was brought in to solve the case. He got a little choked up talking about it and thanking everyone who had assisted his endeavors on Danny's behalf, in particular, Detective Sergeant Court Debwag and Dr. Kelly Harkins Kincaid of Estrella Forensics, whose lab was the cutting edge for obtaining DNA from hair. Danny's was only the 7th case in the U.S. where a cold case murder was resolved through DNA recovered from a rootless hair.
I want my kids to have a healthy relationship with food, which means avoiding junk food as much as possible and giving them things that are good for them. That's why I love giving my kids Orgain. It's convenient, real nutrition that checks all the boxes for me. It provides a good source of complete protein to keep my kids going strong and giving them energy to do all the things they want. It offers over 20 essential vitamins and minerals. Orgain is an excellent source of vitamins B12, D, and zinc to support immune health. It's USDA certified organic and has 25% less sugar than the leading kids' high-protein nutritional shakes. One of the best things that I love about Orgain is that I do not have to force my kids to drink or eat anything from Orgain, because the second they tried their shakes, they loved them. Jace loves the fruity cereal flavor. Jolie loves the vanilla and chocolate. So shop Orgain Kids now, available at Orgain.com and selected retailers.
So you want to start a business? You might think you need a team of people and fancy tech skills, but listen to me when I say you don't. You just need GoDaddy Aero. I'm Walton Goggins, an actor, and I like the sound of starting my own business, Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses. But I couldn't do this on my own. GoDaddy Aero uses AI to create everything you need to grow a business. It'll make you a unique logo. It'll create a custom website. It'll write social posts for you and even set you up with a social media calendar. How cool is that? Well, listen to this. For a limited time, you can get Aero All Access for just $1 a week for 12 weeks. We're talking all the AI power of GoDaddy Aero plus a domain, e-commerce store, payments, professional email, a unified inbox, all for less money than I spend on deep tanning lotion while sunbathing off the Amalfi Coast. You know what that sounds like? A plan. Get started at GoDaddy.com. Terms apply.
With a detailed agent directory you won't find anywhere else, Homes.com is the only place to find the in-depth info home shoppers want. Very in-depth info. Looking for a listing agent's contact info? We've got it. The agent with the most sales in your price range? Easy. Specialized agents with all the up-to-date info on your dream neighborhood? We'll know them. A Pisces who enjoys long walks on the beach? You've got other sites for that.
Homes.com. We've done your homework.
Let's talk about the mess Paul Hutchinson left behind on the home front. His family, of course, had no idea that law enforcement was closing in on him. As far as his wife and 2 children were concerned, him taking his own life was out of the blue, completely shocking, and terribly traumatic. An obituary was written for him and published on the website of the funeral home. I'm going to read it in full, but I'm bleeping out the names of his family members. Paul Hutchinson Obituary, published on Legacy.com by Brundage Funeral Home, Dillon, on August 3, 2024. Paul Nathaniel Hutchinson, a.k.a. Bubba, June 13, 1969 to July 24, 2024. Paul Nathaniel Hutchinson, a.k.a. Bubba, left our world on the morning of Wednesday, July 24, 2024. Paul was born in Nashua, New Hampshire, at St. Joseph Hospital. Paul was the youngest of 6 brothers and sisters. The Hutchinson clan lived in the quaint, tiny town of Wilton, New Hampshire, with mom Sheila Mary Hutchinson and dad Paul Fred Hutchinson, a.k.a. Hutchie. Here, the obituary lists all his siblings, who I'm not going to name. Paul is also survived by many beloved nieces and nephews. Paul is survived by his wife, son, age 21, and daughter, age 18. When Paul would talk about childhood memories, he would tell his children he had to walk uphill both ways to school. Surprisingly, this was actually true due to the 2 hills on the way to the schoolhouse. From a young age, Bubba would run out the door with his fishing tackle and fish on the bridge with the old men until it was time for dinner. Paul loved animals, nature, and anything that would keep him outdoors. While in high school, he worked on a mink farm, which brought in pretty good money, but also a horrible, lingering smell. Bubba was sent home from school many a day when the heat in the classroom would activate that noxious mink smell. Bubba roamed the woods and frog pond behind his home, never alone because his beloved Chesapeake Bay retrievers were in tow. After high school, Bubba helped his dad Hutchie and friends with construction until he decided to enlist in the Marines. The Marines enabled him to travel the world and fight for our freedom. He was honorably discharged after 4 years as a corporal. Paul first went to Keene State College in Keene, New Hampshire for 1 year. Then, hearing the call of the hunting and fishing out west, he applied at Montana State University in Bozeman to finish his Bachelor's of Science in Fisheries Biology. Paul spent part of the year in Bozeman and then doing internships in Glacier National Park and Sisters, Oregon. Paul met the love of his life during a mutual free online trial for both of them on Match.com. They met for the first time on September 1st, 2000, which just happened to be the opening weekend for hunting season. At the time, did not know the significance of Paul missing a weekend hunting, but his family and friends knew it must be love at first sight. On Christmas Eve 2001, they were engaged at his family home with a "Marry Me, Candy Heart" and married in Wilton, New Hampshire. They went on to have 22 wonderful years of marriage and 2 amazing children. Paul was hired as a fisheries biologist at the Dillon, Montana office of the Bureau of Land Management in the spring of 2002. Paul was recognized by Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks for his outstanding public service related to the conservation and protection of the West Slope cutthroat trout in February of 2024. Paul belonged to the Montana chapter of the American Fisheries Society. He served the fish in Montana for over 22 years. When Paul wasn't working up in the mountains for the BLM, he was hunting, fishing, trapping, or foraging for mushrooms and huckleberries. Paul lived and loved life to the fullest and will be sorely missed. If you have a fond memory of Paul, please post a memory on the funeral home page. Paul's family would love to hear memories of this wonderful man, husband, and father. So this obituary ran online, no doubt hastily penned after his abrupt suicide by his shocked and devastated wife. After the resolution of Danny's case was announced and everyone now understood what had driven Houchinson to take his own life so abruptly, his wife requested that the original obituary be taken down and replaced it with the following. "We are absolutely heartbroken to learn this news, and our hearts go out to the Houchins family. It is good to know that they will at last be able to find the closure that they deserve. Our own family was already reeling from dealing with Paul's suicide. In 24 years of marriage, there was never any hint that something like this could be lurking in the background. Paul was an exceptional husband and father. This latest news makes our grieving so much more complicated. We would appreciate being given the space to process and come to terms with this development as we mourn. Thank you." Signed by his wife. The funeral home, too, put a paragraph on their webpage that said, quote, "On behalf of Brundage Funeral Home, we would like to acknowledge the thoughts and sentiments of everyone that is trying to post to Paul's obituary, and these are all valid feelings. We would also like to express our deepest sympathy for Danny's family, for their loss, and hope that they are able to find closure for this heinous event. For everyone, please understand that the position of a funeral home is not to sit in judgment of anyone, but to support the families that are left to pick up the pieces of this or any other events in life. The family of Paul are now also trying to figure out how to move forward and pick up the pieces of their lives that they now question. The wife and children were not aware of any crimes that have happened prior to them and are also reeling from this news. The funeral home would ask that everyone please understand that we do not condone what happened in 1996 or any other crimes he may have committed, but respect our obligation to our families we serve and will give the same dedication, dignity, and respect to all the families we serve. Thank you for understanding." I'd like to add something here, something that happened after Paul Hutchinson's funeral, and probably something that made his wife reconsider the obituary she had written. One of Hutchinson's female relatives, either his sister or his sister-in-law, called the Beaverhead County Sheriff and reported that Hutchinson had attempted to molest her niece, a child within the extended family, when the girl was 10 years old, and they had never reported it. It's so predictable with these child predators. There is never only one victim. All right, so let's talk about what actually happened to Danny. I don't want to give Sheriff Slaughter any more airtime, but I want to mention statements he made after the case was solved and Paul Hutchinson was fingered as the man who violently held Danny's face into the mud, suffocating and drowning her until she was dead. The former sheriff tried to save face in an interview with USA Today. Here is an excerpt. Quote, "Slaughter said he understands the frustrations of outsiders who may not have known what was being done by investigators working the case, but he denies deprioritizing or giving up on Houchin's death. We never talked about anything but a homicide," Slaughter said. "It was a tough case to investigate as far as the crime scene goes. It was kind of located in a swamp, which doesn't help you." Slaughter said that he, too, was frustrated that the coroner and state forensic examiner listed the manner of death as unknown. "We've all felt like she was a strong young woman," Slaughter said. "She didn't fall in 4 inches of water or 3 inches of water in a swamp and drown. She just didn't. I mean, all she had to do was roll over on her back, right? We were all frustrated about that call that it wasn't a homicide," end quote. In the article, Slaughter claims that his agency told the Houchinses that Danny was murdered, which we know was absolutely untrue. Then in February of this year, quote, 48 Hours reached out to the man who was sheriff in 1996, Bill Slaughter, now retired. Slaughter admits withholding some information from Danny's family, but claims he never lied to them, despite the fact he told the local newspaper in 1996 that there was no indication of foul play. I don't think I need to comment any further on this. It's truly a case where a horrific child murder was shoved under the proverbial rug for political and possibly sexist reasons. And all we can do all these years later is hope that this kind of situation would not, could not, happen today. But you heard Stephanie's comments at the press conference. Montana's counties operate almost in a vacuum, and there's no known repository of cold or unsolved cases in the state. It's the Wild West, and seems as though it would be an optimal place for a killer to operate. Speaking of killers, what did happen that day on the Cameron Bridge fishing access site trail? Danny parked her truck in the parking area and prepared to set out on a hike. The fact that her truck was not locked, something her parents tell us she was trained to do, indicates that she was confronted there. The investigators surmise that Hutchinson saw the young blonde girl and saw that no one was around. He approached her and something spooked her and she ran, dropping her water bottle and keys as she fled down the trail. Danny might not have been disabled by her brace, but the damaged ligaments and bulky apparatus likely meant that she was unable to run at top speed from an assailant. She was also wearing sandals, not sneakers. Powerful, 6'4" tall Hutchinson quickly caught up with her, threw her to the ground, struck her, sexually assaulted her, leaving semen all over the outside of her underwear and his arm hairs on her and in her. Then he shoved her face down in the muddy water until she stopped breathing. He dragged her by the left arm further into the marsh, chucked her sandal into the bushes, and took off. The whole thing could have gone down in like 7 minutes. Remember that Hutchinson's wife said that he was sexually dysfunctional and had difficulty climaxing through traditional intercourse. His arm hair was found on Danny's cervix, but he climaxed all over Danny's underwear. She was found with her jeans fastened, but her bra pushed up. It's impossible to know what happened here. The investigators believe that Hutchinson prematurely climaxed all over Danny's underwear and then killed her, but that does not explain his arm hair found internally. We will never know the exact sequence of events, but we do know that Paul Hutchinson got extremely, incredibly, impossibly lucky. Lucky that no one saw him that day at the fishing access site. Lucky that the authorities who were supposed to put him away did not do their job. Lucky that evidence was lost and destroyed. And lucky that he got to live a rich, nearly full life. I was told by both the seasoned investigators who closed this case that Danny's case would have been solvable back in 1996 if police had done their job. Instead, the items in her pockets were lost. Her watch was lost. Her clothing is MIA. Her underwear were missing for years. A sexual assault kit was not done. Her truck was processed by deputies who were not wearing gloves. The cigarette butt on the trail was not collected. And of course, her case was classified as a drowning due to undetermined causes. You know another thing that's lucky? It's lucky that this case was ever solved, despite the nearly insurmountable odds against it. But let me correct that statement. It wasn't luck at all. It was a sheriff willing to right the wrongs of his predecessors. It was dogged investigators determined to achieve justice for Danny, and it was modern science and investigative techniques like IgG saving the day when all else had failed. Modern investigators believe that it is likely that Danny was not Hutchinson's first victim. We know that he raped and killed a girl in broad daylight in a popular recreation area filled with people. The crime was so brazen, so audacious, and so merciless that it speaks to an experienced, confident predator. To me, that would help explain why he was so quick to take his own life. He had to know that Danny's case had been classified as an accidental death, and he would have a very good defense at trial because even the medical examiner, coroner, and sheriff at the time did not consider her death a homicide. Yet, at the mere suggestion that the investigators had the killer's DNA and felt they would soon identify it, he shot himself. That sounds like someone with a very guilty conscience and someone who has lost all hope. As for Danny's family, I very much hope that the perseverance, dedication, transparency, and honesty of Gallatin County Sheriff Dan Springer, Chief Deputy Eric Paulson, Special Deputy Tom Elfmont, and Newport Detective Sergeant Court Depweg have somewhat restored their faith in law enforcement. After 28 years, Danny Houchins' case is resolved thanks to IgG, and if you are one of the bad guys, they are coming for you. Thanks a million to Detective Sergeant Court Depweg and to Captain Tom Elfmont, who is moving up in the ranks of my favorite detectives. Insert wink emoji here. This will be the last full-length episode of DNA ID before my summer hiatus. I'll be bringing you a special crossover episode next Monday, June 30th, and then I'll be on summer break. I'm very much looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible at CrimeCon 2025 in early September. Don't forget to use the coupon code DNAID to get 10% off the purchase of your standard admission badge, and come say hello on Podcast Row. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. Before you leave, please let me tell you about some important things related to the show. If you'd like to support this podcast, and in the process, get access to early and ad-free episodes, as well as bonus content like crime scene photos, you can sign up for a Patreon subscription for only $5 a month by heading over to patreon.com/DNAID. Of course, you're welcome to contribute more than $5 a month. We rely on Patreon funds to pay for the original source materials I use to research each episode. If Patreon isn't your thing, you can also show your support with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts. It costs just $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year. Your AbJack Insider subscription will give you the same benefits for not only DNA ID, but for all of the shows on the AbJack network, like Killer Communications and Campus Killings. Head over to Apple Podcasts and find the DNA ID page, or look for the AbJack network to get started. If you're on social media, we'd love to interact with you there. DNA ID is on every major social media platform. Search your favorite platforms for DNA ID Podcast to find us. We also have a YouTube channel, and our website is dnaidpodcast.com. You can find links to all of these anytime in our show notes. If you need to reach the show, contact us by emailing dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Finally, if you want to pick up some fun DNA ID merch and represent the show, visit the store at www.customizedgirl.com/s/DNA ID podcast. DNA ID is researched, written, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience in their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's LIBSYN, ads.com today.